Hello, and thanks for joining us for another one of our Wednesday webinars, and particularly a lot of questions and interests about made in Canada and products and services that are available, and how some insights from us and what we're seeing with the media and how to address this. But also, we've had questions also if you're not a Canadian product or service, what are we seeing and what are we advising? And so today, what I'm going to do is probably for the next 30 minutes, just go through some of these insights, a little bit about who we are, again, based on our media survey, particularly when it comes to buying local and local messages, what we've heard from our surveys, and then to show you some examples that we've seen that have really worked with a local message, but also other messaging when it comes to key messages within an organization, be it corporate social responsibility and how you can integrate that into content successfully. And then also our approach and what we're seeing in terms of pickup when it comes to non-Canadian products or services, how we're approaching that in the past few months, especially since it's become a lot more known in the social consciousness about buying local. Today, again, I'm going to briefly give you an overview of who we are, but I am joined by our team, account management, as well as our media relations director, Asma, because I want to leave room for time if there's other questions that I don't address that we can look into. And then if you have very specific questions about your organization or as an agency, if you represent different clients, we're happy to have a call just to talk about how we could approach if you're having some challenges, again, in terms of getting pickup, but just an idea, a thought starter for today. And just for those that are not familiar with us, we have been in the space of creating content since 1981, so over 40 years, primarily within Canada, though we do actually distribute and create content for the US. We've worked with pretty much every type of organization, be it government entities, nonprofits, for-profits, as well as working with agencies like Strategic Objectives, Edelman, and their client base. And based on our knowledge and insights, we actually have guaranteed benchmarks for all of the pickup that we do in terms of the outreach, and we provide proof of performance in the media ratings points system known as MRP. And when I talk about our network, where we're getting this information, the media that we work with in Canada that is on a national basis in English and French. We also work with various regional outreach, which is for Western Canada, Ontario, and Quebec. Publications that pick us up are some of the free publications that still exist, like For Rent, Rent a Decor, Curb Appeal. We do work with the majors too, Post Media, Village Media, Montreal Journal, Black Press, Metroland, but we have an ever expanding base of usage, and that is a growing space for us is multicultural and immigrant focused. And what's really interesting is while we put out the content in English and French, it's actually translated by the media, and we pick that up in a variety of languages and are used by specific community-based publications. And a very large one, requested content comes from seniors and 55 focused publications. And in terms of the type of pickup, we mainly are in the print and online space, with broadcast being radio. And on average, the clips that are coming through where we get our data information is we have over 20,000 pieces of content, for example, from last year. So what's interesting is, well, I'll share with you some of the survey insights that we did from our latest survey with media. We're also able to track in an evolving landscape what the pickup trend actually looks like, so the cause and effect basically of our learnings. And that's also through now new partnerships with MSN Canada, as well as our consumer life brands, For Your Life. And the space that we play basically in the content creation is supplementary content, be it for radio or for articles on the website. So our content and the guidelines that we provide very much mimic what the new standards are, as we want basically the media to use the content as is within their publication or their broadcast or online. And when I mentioned the consumer-facing website, that is For Your Life, in terms of that facilitated actually the content that we share there is then refed on MSN as an added value for our outreach. So when we looked at what the media want in 2025, I feel like it's very timely. The idea of promoting Canadian products and services wouldn't be new to us seeing that in the landscape. Again, it is the audience. So when the media are looking at content, they're obviously thinking about who's reading, who's listening, who's watching the content on their site. And again, if it's for Canada, they are looking for ways that are relevant to that audience and calling it out specifically. And when we did the survey, we were very happy that it's representative of a large base. We have over 3,000 contacts across Canada. And so we were happy to see that we had everything from the bigger publications to the community papers, which we are known for. That's still our sweet spot. Just before the call, we were talking about the number of publications that were distributed, and for newspapers, it's actually 28 million copies of newspapers, and that could be in a variety of different formats that are distributed on a weekly basis. And I always highly recommend to get the latest trends from News Media Canada, is the association that represents a newspaper in the community newspaper association. And then we do our own independent research to understand the specific needs of our users. And also, it was important to us that we had also good French representation in terms of the pickup. So as I mentioned, the media, and then this was done in December, so timing wise too, we're just seeing after the US election. We were actually conducting this survey just before then and over that time period, and I'll share some of the pickup trends we're seeing and later in the presentation. But the relevance to audience has always been one of the number one reasons. Is it representative to a Canadian audience? And there's techniques that we use, again, where if it is, for example, a niche health concern, we're there to sort of help figure out ways that can address that while providing, interest to a larger part of the population. And so relevance to the audience, again, having Canadian specific content, and that can be something like if you're, again, you might be we work with a lot of multinationals, and sometimes to bring that relevancy to Canada is maybe bringing a stat that, according to Health Canada, so many people actually suffer from this particular ailment. So there's ways that we find to, even if you're in as a multinational, multiple regions, is how do you actually bring that story home to Canadians? And again, another is how to do that in a non-promotional way. And that's, again, for our content tends to be around 250 to 400 words. So having strategic mentions of the organization as key messages so that it doesn't compete. The content that we put out is free of cost to any media, any entity to use. But just because it's free doesn't mean it'll get used. So we have to make sure that it's not competing with, say, an advertorial, which obviously an organization would pay for. We need to blend again in with the news editorial features that are there, and then having images and videos that can go along. We pretty much now know that any piece of content, be it an article, needs to have a visual, if not more than one, in order to get pickup. Another area that when you talk about addressing Canadians, that's important to note is that the type of audience and the content and variety is key. And you'll see today, I'll show you, because you might not readily be aware of how you might address some of these topics. And again, we have to find alignment. And one of those areas I'm going to talk about is food and recipes, and how both food companies and non-food companies are using the fact that media really love this type of content to see if there's an alignment that you can actually take advantage, because we know it's highly of interest to media. And the other areas there too is just being able to address different segments of the population. And for us, the 50 plus continues to be one of the larger areas that they're looking for content that they feel underserved for. The other aspect too, is again, finding opportunities to tell a story about Canada, is we ask them about the special sections. Not to say you can't talk about it in other areas in special sections for the year, but we do find sometimes content opportunities might be missed out when it comes to Canada Day. And ways we've approached that in the past is long weekends. Again, with a variety of content, one piece might actually talk about Canada Day or mention it. Another one that we find may not apply to every organization, but Remembrance Day, again, one of the top three. We find that's a very important topic to communities, which is the papers that pick us up the most, in having content that actually addresses that, both visually as well as in the content itself. And so these were the top areas that there'd be other ways to find alignment, but two that kind of stuck out to me in terms of aligning with this sort of made in Canada and Canadian story. And again, just looking at the actual, we're talking about how to create the content. The majority of editors are still looking for that 250 to 500 word mark. But what was interesting for us to see is that there is now a demand for quick read articles. We tried something new a few years ago where we've kept on with it, is where we've taken, for our radio service, we create radio spots. So we would give the stations a script, and we found there was interest actually to take that script and basically reformat it into an article. And to give you an example, that is actually within 150 to 170 words. And so seeing that success, then we've opened up basically opportunity, if you can obviously tell a comprehensive story in that word space, to make use of it, so that editors have the choice to, because we are still getting picked up in print publications, and it is very much a space requirement. And we're monitoring also, we would see some social pickup too. And we all know that bite-sized chunks when it comes to social media is what media are looking for. And then finally, just the most important content guidelines, which would be across the board, is still Canadian press style. And we don't expect everyone to know that offhand, but we are experts here. And so we advise based on that standard to create a neutral, non-promotional tone. There still are ways to integrate brands' call to actions that don't challenge that. And that's part of our editing and writing process. Again, within 400 words, we find 2 brand mentions tends to be the norm in terms of pickup. And specifically for brand mentions for non-Canadian products and services, we're experimenting with placement there just to see media perception. A photo to accompany every article. We actually find if you have more than one, particularly if it shows a different demographic within that photo, it helps, because again, if you have a recipe, for example, it might not naturally appeal in content wise to a 50 plus demographic, but your photo could. And so again, it just, because we get picked up by targeted magazines and publications that are addressing that audience, it's an easy way to get the editor and have a little bit more alignment on that need. Okay, so now moving into a few examples. As I mentioned, we've actually been working with a lot of local messaging, so I'm able to see success rates from previous campaigns to share. And this one particular client was really trying to talk about some key messages within Ontario. That's basically the scope of what the message and the audience that they were looking for. And they had some pretty unique information that they wanted to talk about, which was migrant workers, as well as looking at different harvests and produce that you can get within the province. And so kind of a blend of a lifestyle, but with, again, a key message that they were trying to figure out, how can we get out this information within a larger context. And very successfully, what basically the recommendation is for recipe content for us in this case is not just the recipe itself. We actually will create a story around the recipe, and that's what editors are expecting for us, because they want to have a little bit of context about the recipe itself and how it becomes a bit of a lifestyle piece. And so that's what we did for this one. I thought was really interesting. And again, it was an Ontario-based organization, but it had this aspirational quality that I think really appealed to editors. And I've seen that work really well in multiple cases. I'll show you another example from a non-food company. And not only addressing the fact of, how can you have appeal and again include these sort of aspirational elements. And sometimes what we find too is sometimes the products and services may only address a niche audience, but as you'll see in a travel example, it still gives something for the average Canadian to make use of, and have this kind of additive to their lifestyle information. And so editors, again, as I mentioned, like recipes, they were very interested in the human interest. This was again about the narrative about the growers and workers, migrant workers that were part of the key message of the organization. And so there was takeaways for different types of audiences. And in this case, it actually did provide a little bit of a longer format for some publications that wanted probably the upwards of the 500 word mark. Particularly when it comes to online. That's why we like to have variety. For those that are used to our service, we say about 4 articles within 1,500 words. And that gives us an opportunity to have a short article that appeals to some editors, and then a longer one for other types of editors. And we find that recipes have this great kind of high engagement rate. And so that one article was picked up by 63 outlets, which was Global Heroes, which appears in the National Post, Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, as well as Turtle Island News for Aboriginal readership, as well as Village Media in Ontario, which is probably one of the best news stories about a news organization that was digital first. They now, I think, have over 20 sites that are associated with them for different demographics around the province. And you can see basically they took the story, and that's the placement there where they had the story, the image, and the recipe. And this is basically how it got placed in the different publications. And that campaign itself, this was one piece of a larger campaign that generated 238 articles with 21.4 million in audience reach. The other thing that I found very interesting, and I do have more examples in this recipes that just have been done very well, is how you can take actually the again a recipe and incorporate more than just again maybe a Canadian, maybe you have other CSR initiatives that are going in. And I really like this example that appealed because we know that the environment and climate change is also something that editors are interested. And so they had that kind of combo piece here where they had eco-friendly that appealed. And then if you can see in terms of the box there, I'll show the presentation afterwards if you want to take a look at a deeper dive of the content. Talked about buying local blueberries, and then the fact that you can choose a carbon neutral food company. And if you want recipes like this that meet all that criteria, you can actually go back to the client's website to learn more. And my background actually started in corporate communications. And I know sometimes it can be a bit challenging with, how do you get coverage about these messages? And we found packaging them within information that obviously makes sense to the organization can help do that. And so this is one way that we took multiple pieces of information and actually were able to get a significant pickup for the client. And so this is, you know, be like, well, I'm not a food company. This is, I don't have produce recipes. And what we've been able to find is there's actually sometimes ways to tie it in where appropriate. And on the left-hand side, this was a travel company. And what I liked about this program is the actual intended audience is probably demographic where those that would go on a cruise, which is not necessarily the average Canadian, definitely a higher income level for that. And so we had to think about why would the average Canadian care about this? And so what we looked at is, well, again, you can transport yourself, in this case, to France by, cooking this French recipe. And so created a recipe and then had the call to action about learning more about, escaping to France through the client's website. Another organization this worked really well. It's not a recipe, but it's something anti-inflammatory ingredients that you can have in your pantry, and that came through the Arthritis Society quite successfully. We've actually found from the metrics that we've seen, not only from Pickup, but even from MSN, that arthritis is a very popular topic for Canadians in terms of their searches. And so these are ways that we look to pair. I think even the Kidney Foundation, actually, we did something too about kidney-friendly type recipes. And so this is not the only piece of content that we put out, but we find ways where appropriate just to capitalize on this trend where it makes sense, and then to lead to more information. And in some cases, you might not have recipes back on your website, but you might have more information about the topic that people can learn about. So in this case, it was, different travel options, or maybe there's more information about, if you or a loved one suffers from arthritis, that you can learn more about your options through this website. And so just to switch gears a little bit is just for another type of organization that I've seen kind of weave in the narrative about Canada, which was quite interesting and was very well received by the media, and looking at home hardware and the different options. They are a Canadian company, and how they integrated buying local, but also a little bit about the story about how some of their products have actually, that they offer, have come about. And what was interesting here, that again, 112 media pickup, is how they woven a little bit of the story about, say in this case, this product was the undertones of the Canadian Western red cedars. It was interesting. And then also looking at local options where you could actually buy local for them. And so again, a different way where you're just trying to look at the narrative and see where it's appropriate to add in this other context to localize the pickup. And as I mentioned, you might not have that story about your product or service, and that's where you can look at other ways, novel stats and information. Maybe you've conducted your own survey to say, trends and information that are going on in Canada. Because we report on the audience reach potential, we know ComScore for our online data, and we work with Vivid Data for Canadian stats for magazines and publications and radio. And I'd highly recommend following their newsletters, because they will do that. They'll actually give you that novel information. I know that Vivid Data does a lot of research about, for example, they talked about the fast food industry after COVID, what were Canadians doing? So there's stats there that you can use to support. And what we do is, when we do the briefing process, we look for information like that from yourselves, or offer other known sources that can help, again, localize the message. And so again, a topic that's evolving for us is, what is, for those that are not Canadian products and services, and not just being a multinational, and people to understand that they're around the world, but if you're specifically talking about a product and naming, for example, it's from a state in the U.S. or it's from another country, what are we seeing in terms of a pickup trends? And so I particularly was looking at the coverage since November. The U.S. election happened, in terms of, I looked at a number of brands that would actually name that state or country outside of Canada. And for those that don't know, our terms of agreement with media is they are asked to use the content as is. And we follow and talk to them if they are removing any part of the publication. And so there were two things I was looking at: is there been a stall in terms of pickup? And I haven't seen a stall since that time. So basically 700 clips across 3 clients. If you average that out, that's a lot. That's actually a lot of clips that are happening. And of those where there was a problem, and in some cases we've already addressed it with the publications that maybe altered and removed a brand mention. It actually had to do with them not understanding our terms of service, but really represented 4 publications. So that was just pulled this week. So we haven't seen an impact, again, with clients that, in a negative way, that are naming other non-Canadian products and services. However, we are cognizant of that fact. And so this really reminds me of when COVID happened. Nothing, that was pretty much different situation, but in terms of gear shifts, what we do is we monitor the situation, and obviously in that case had to do a lot with regulations. But in this case, what we're trying to do is, if we have, again, 4 pieces of content is sort of the minimum package that we do, is looking at how we can present the name of the product if it mentions in different places within the article, because we know, again, the trend is buy local. So, we want to talk about the story and introduce the brand, maybe in the middle, maybe one in the beginning, and then maybe one towards the end for a call to action. And that wouldn't be too different, actually, how we would approach brands normally, because we want readers or listeners to buy into the value of the information itself. And so we have the hook of the information at the beginning to draw them in their interest. And then by providing this variety of different approaches, we're watching to see is how that impacts in terms of the trend. So for each piece of content, we actually see the pickup individually. And how we work with our clients is on a normal basis is we would watch for monitoring to come in. Usually it takes about a month and a half, unless we see something different, to see if something is stalling. And what we're doing too is if there's something in an approach, when we provide the content recommendations, we're providing maybe 2 alternate headlines or intros, so that if we need to switch the content out, and this might even happen if it's a timely topic. So if we're talking about winter, which seems to be coming and going, we can alternate the headline if, for example, we get an early spring in March. So something already part of our processes. And then we're adapting basically to see where the pickup. So if something changes, so that, again, where we see that things are still getting picked up, that's where people ask me, like, what is a guarantee with coverage? And basically, we know if you follow, again, our guidelines within following Canadian Press Standard guidelines, have that neutral reporter tone, limit the brand mentions, to 1 or 2. If for some reason the content doesn't perform as we know it to, then we do that adaptation or recommendations at no additional cost, because we know this is out of the blue, sort of a situation like this where, like COVID, it wasn't expected, and basically we had to adapt because the media were adapting in that case almost on a daily basis. And so that's what, when we talk about our services, that's what it means with the guarantee, is that we've gone into it having an understanding, and if things change, then you don't have to worry about additional costs, and we basically align and present new information as needed to the media to achieve the benchmark that we've set out for. And that's a lot of different kind of information, and we have a lot of resources, and I'll be actually creating a blog about this information too, and updating it as things evolve. But I recognize that there might be very specific situations that maybe you have, and our approach is either to have a quick call about that. We do on our website have editorial calendars both for the full year as well as for the individual months. And depending on media request change, we actually do outreach. So if you sign up for our newsletter, we will actually update on an ongoing basis if we have any specific requests, particularly for those timely topics that we see come up. But they're generally, it follows a normal cycle for the different awareness months and days. And at the end of the presentation, what I can do when I follow up is I can send you the full presentation that we did about our media survey, because there's other insights there too when it comes to awareness weeks and what media are looking for. And just so you know, you can actually unmute yourself if it's easier to ask your question that way. Is there anything, other questions or things that I can look into to share during our follow-up? I'll just take a look and see if we have any questions here or challenges that you're seeing. So there might be a question coming up here. Okay. Not sure, Molly, if it'd be easier just to unmute, or you just have to right click, I think, on the or click off.
Sorry, yeah, I
No,
just
that's
got
okay.
it in the chat. Oh, sorry, it was a
Okay.
bit of a mouthful. Like, I know you've kind of touched on this, but I feel like there's been a really big with Buy Canada movement, like specifically in the past couple weeks, like not even just since the election. Like, So I'm just wondering, like, is there anything else we can be doing? Like, I know, like, people have been exploring, like, in a press release, maybe adding like a line of, hey, we're a Canadian brand or whatsoever. Like, how do you think this is kind of, I know you've kind of touched on it, but is there any, like, anything else, any other insights you can provide?
Sure, there definitely needs to be continuity, and sometimes it does happen where people talk about things in the article and they don't have anywhere for people to go, because particularly with what we do, it's meant to be a teaser. So whatever I would say is that if you have a call to action, or again, if someone's going to Google, is that that information then is supported by where you're asking them to go in their journey. And the way
Mhm.
I've seen some brands doing that is making it more apparent in terms of the website and their story when it comes
Okay.
to being part of Canada. So I just would say consistency. It sounds like it would be normal just to do that, but I have said that sometimes I've looked at the CTAs and they lead kind of to the homepage and there's nothing. So sometimes I find it's a collaboration between, again, the communications and marketing people and then the website people, and sometimes that can be different teams. So I'd say
Mhm.
just make sure everything's sort of meaningful, because we find, because of the stats that we get from MSN, we've seen that it's a very engaged audience. So you wouldn't want to lose that momentum. We've seen the average duration from people coming, particularly from that medium, spend an average of 2.5 minutes on our site when they come over to For Your Life, and we've heard of similar things. So we just want, if you've taken all that trouble to get that momentum, just to carry it forward. So it's like thinking through the customer journey. And
Mhm.
I'm sure that most organizations do. It's just sometimes I find that that does fall a little bit flat um, with the CTA.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, I appreciate everyone taking some time during the lunch hour. This will probably be an evolving, and if there's different insights that I can share from the media. For example, I mentioned Asma is on the call, and she speaks, our media relations director, quite frequently with the media about their needs and information. And so, if that changes, if there's opportunity to do more sort of features, I kind of see that potentially evolving based on content. So we have a stable. If you go to newscanada.com, automotive, finance, health. But what we're seeing is a category where we might start to highlight actually made in Canada products ourselves too, as we see the content that fills that need. So we're keeping pace, basically with what's going on in the media and in politics, and how that translates over into what we do. So an ongoing story for sure. All right. I will follow up with the deck, my contact information. Please let me know if you have any other questions or things that we can look into for you. Appreciate it.